Thank you, Madam Mayor, and members of the council. To provide a little bit of background on the topic currently before the council, prior to 1990, the zoning code listed daycare facilities and private kindergartens as a conditionally permitted use within, at that time, was the RS zoning district, which was the city's only one and only single-family residential zoning district. In 1990, the city conducted its most recent update and broadest update to the city zoning code, and at that time, the city created two single-family only residential zoning districts, the R1 and the R2 district. In that ordinance as well, it created a system of daycare facilities at that time, which were home, small, intermediate, and large, and developed specific use standards that applied to daycare facilities that were proposed to be established within the city of Moscow. A subsequent ordinance later on changed the classification to our current classification that is family, group, small, and large. And for those who may not be familiar, family is for a daycare facility with 1 to 5 children, group is 6 to 12, small is 13 to 20, and large is 21 children and above. Within the R1 and the R2 zoning districts, libraries, galleries, museums, public and private schools, and small daycare facilities were listed as permitted principal uses under that Ordinance 90 in 1990. Schools were later changed to a conditionally permitted use within the R1 and the R2 zoning district under Ordinance 9938. After the establishment of some school facilities in some, especially on some cul-de-sacs in fairly low-volume residential, single-family residential areas. Churches, non-commercial, private recreation facilities, and boarding houses were also identified as being conditionally permitted uses within the R1 and the R2 district. And large daycare facilities were singled out as being conditionally permitted with the R1 and the R2 district, but only where such daycare facility was located within 300 feet of an elementary school. That same ordinance also included specific standards for the consideration of large daycare facilities. And the code states that additional large daycare facility standards to ensure that traffic generated by large daycare facility will not disrupt a residential neighborhood characterized by low volumes of vehicular traffic. Such facilities shall be located on a city street that has at least 500 vehicles per day, located within 300 feet of a school, and provide after-school services for school-aged children, or be permitted within a facility if it's located in a church, grange hall, social center, or other large public assembly building, or item number 4, upon issuance of a conditional use permit. So these are standards that apply specifically to large daycare facilities to guide their placement within the city. In reading of the code as a whole, it certainly appears to be the intent that to ensure that large daycare facilities do not place an undue burden or disrupt neighborhoods due to their traffic and activity, and that the standards also appear to indicate that there are certain conditions under which large daycare facilities were appropriately located, again, those higher volume streets, those larger community facilities, or through consideration of a conditional use permit. The staff believes that there are many locations within the R1 and the R2 district that may be located along higher class roadways, certainly roadways that are far in excess of 500 vehicles per day. And there are also larger community facilities such as churches or community centers that could accommodate such a facility but may not be located within 300 feet of an elementary school. Additionally, there's a general premise under the zoning code that we treat uses with similar impacts in a similar fashion. Currently under the city zoning code, you could have any size of elementary school permitted just through a conditional use permit within the R1 and the R2 districts, but a large daycare facility with 21 or 25 children may not be permitted in that district unless it's within 300 feet of an elementary school. So there appears to be some internal inconsistency in the code, with one section speaking to the location of these facilities on certain streets or in certain type of community facilities, or consideration through a conditional use permit with this additional restriction in the R1 and the R2 zones. And this really came to light with a recent application for a facility that was a large church that was well suited for the site, had a great drop-off locations, but would not be permissible due to its lack of being within 300 feet of an elementary school. So staff has developed a proposal for the council's consideration that would remove the proximity requirement from elementary schools. All the other specific use standards would still apply. Large daycare facilities would be listed as a conditionally permitted use, so there's a public hearing. There is notice that's provided to everyone within 600 feet of the property, so there's opportunity for comment, for limitations or conditions to mitigate impacts, and all of the specific use standards that direct those facilities to roadways that have higher volumes or to larger community facilities would still exist. We would just kind of remove that one internal inconsistency in the code. The result is it would allow consideration of sites that may not be within 300 feet of an elementary school, obviously, that could be considered for a large daycare facility. The Planning and Zoning Commission conducted a public hearing on this matter on February 27th, and at that time they recommended approval of the proposed amendment to the City Council. So the action of the council this evening is to conduct the public hearing, and upon consideration of any testimony presented, pass the ordinance or reject the ordinance or take other action as the council deems appropriate. So with that, I'd be happy to try to answer questions that the council may have.
Thank you, Bill. Council members? Walter?
Bill, this applies to R1 and R2. It is not a condition of R3 and R4 at the present time?
That's correct.
So we're bringing R1 and R2 in conformity, so to speak, with R3 and 4?
You bring it to the same standard.
Same standard.
That's correct.
Okay, and I think you stated that we're going to conduct a public hearing?
That's correct.
It's a legislative hearing, yes.
Okay. All right, I don't see it in the agenda.
It's on the
Legislative hearing, item
Turn the
6.
page.
over, back to the description by the number there.
Okay,
Okay.
Stand corrected.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, Bill. Okay, this is a little more relaxed than the previous hearing. Nonetheless, it is a public hearing, so let me open it up and invite you to come forward if you'd like to speak to this issue. General comments, state your name and address for our record, please. Okay, seeing no one come forward, this is about the daycare. Yeah? All right, please, Joanne,
I just have a question.
please tell us who you are and where you live.
Joanne Manita, 203 South Howard. Excuse me. Are these daycare facilities required to have an outdoor play area for children? Is that in our ordinance?
Well, this consideration tonight is apart from the other regulations concerning daycare operations, so the council is not considering that aspect of the existing.
No, I just think it's important if it's going to be in an R1 neighborhood.
Okay, so whether it's proximal to a school relative to play space, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if there's play
Okay.
space available, otherwise it would be difficult.
Okay. Bill, can you respond to that, please?
The zoning code does not have any specific outdoor play area requirements. The city does through its other daycare licensing provisions. The zoning code does require screening of adjacent yards if there's going to be an outdoor play area. So if there is one, you're required to put privacy screening so that the adjacent property owners can have privacy if the children are out in that outdoor play area. So there are screening standards that exist within the zoning code, but we don't have a specific outdoor play area requirement. Those reside in the city's daycare ordinances.
And can you speak to the daycare ordinance aspect? Because I think Joanne is asking relative to children's other access to other play areas if it's not specifically called out.
It is generally required. I think the council has, in the past, heard applications to waive that requirement. When there was, for example, a daycare that was proposed in the downtown area, that requirement was waived by the council. So I am not intimately familiar with that provision. The city clerk administers that, and actually Stephanie might be able to answer that question more directly than I can.
And as I recall, that one downtown, they actually required some indoor play space, so it was offered and accepted. We'll get an answer for you here in a minute.
Oh, okay.
But play space, the councils have traditionally agreed with you that play areas are important. Stephanie, can you address the ordinance as relates? Okay. All right.
Moscow City Code, Chapter 9, Section 1019, subsection G states that the daycare facility shall provide open space for outdoor play. A minimum of 100 square feet per child is required. This area shall be adjacent to the daycare facility and shall provide a safe play area that can be easily maintained and is accessible for use by children.
Does that answer your question?
Well, it does. I just was thinking that if it wasn't screened from the neighborhood, that it would, I guess it would come up in asking for a conditional use permit. But I have seen daycare facilities with children playing outside, and it's right next to a residential property. And I think that's a problem. But that's what I would say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Others who would like to speak to this issue? Seeing no one else come forward, I'll close this public hearing and open it up to the council for its discussion. Sue?
Well, I think this is a no-brainer. So I would like to move to approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary.
Second.
Okay, we have Sue's motion, we have Walter's second. Any discussion before voting? Okay, hearing none, we'll start the roll call vote with Dan.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. So that's ordinance number 2013-5, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the amendment of Moscow City Code Title 4, Chapter 2, providing for the ordinance of large daycare, providing for the allowance of large daycare facilities as a conditionally permitted use within the low-density R1 and moderate-density R2 single-family residential zoning districts, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable, and providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law.